Want to welcome everyone. Our next panel again is going to be on STEM education, and we have a mix of experts from academia, business, and government, including Secretary Mary Miller as our moderator. And I ask our panelists to come and join us to get the ball rolling here. You know, at the outset, we talked about STEM education as being a national security issue, as well as it has implications for all aspects of our lives, right? We have partnered, you know, CED is engaged in early childhood, K through 12 education, post-secondary education, the whole spectrum, and we have partnered with a group of former admirals and generals who are concerned about the fact that 75% of 18 to 25-year-olds are not eligible to serve in our military. And there's a variety of reasons for that. But when it comes to educating our young people and preparing them for careers, we understand and we know and we're concerned that they're not prepared to serve and protect our country at levels that we think are adequate. So I'm going to turn it over to the panel to continue this discussion that Congresswoman Davis started earlier this morning, and thanks for being here.
Thank you very much. I'm going to give everyone on the panel a chance to introduce themselves and where they're from, and then I'll start us off. I am Mary Miller. I'm the Principal Deputy for the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Research and Engineering in the Department of Defense.
Good morning. My name is Cecelia Smith, and I'm with Texas Instruments based in Dallas, Texas. I'm Vice President and General Manager of our Mixed Signal Automotive Business Unit.
My name is Michael Lach. I was a high school science teacher for about 10 years, and then I sold out, became a bureaucrat, and I sold out again and became an academic. I'm now at the University of Chicago, where I do research and technical assistance on large-scale K-12 math and science improvement efforts.
I'm Gregg Fleisher. I think I sold out the other way. I started my life as an actuary, became a high school math teacher, and then started a nonprofit, and I'm the president of the National Math and Science Initiative.
Hi, everybody. I'm David Williams, and quite frankly, there was nothing to sell out. I've always been in business. I'm with Deloitte, and I lead our policy and government relations efforts.
Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us today for what I believe is an important conversation, the importance of STEM education. Why does it matter? Clearly, those of us here in this room believe that it does matter, and today we have assembled this panel who have very clear thoughts about STEM and ideas on how to improve STEM education in this nation. For me, well, I have a personal bias. As somebody who works for the Department of Defense, I believe that a STEM-educated workforce is the foundation of national security. Why? Because technology has gone global. Because almost everything we do in our daily lives has some element of technology associated with it. From simple technology like automatic garage door openers to more complicated technology like our global positioning systems, which gives us the ability to know where we're driving via Waze to get here today, or simply talk on a cell phone, which is the timing part of GPS. Because we in the United States need to maintain a technical advantage to ensure the nation of this safety, that's why STEM is important. So how did I personally get here? I joined the Army over 32 years ago as a civilian engineer, working in the area of nonlinear optics. I was enticed to work for the Army because they offered me two great things that I didn't hear in any of my interviews with industry. One, extremely challenging problems. In this case, it was protecting soldiers' eyes and sensor systems from laser damage. And two, a level of autonomy to do my research. I loved my job. I worked with a small team of like-minded individuals, and we learned new things every day because I was doing fundamental science. Some ask me, why'd you become an engineer? Well, that gets a little bit more dicey. I am the youngest of 6. As the youngest of 6, I was always the Me Too person. Those of you that have lots of kids or larger families, you know what I mean. I had an older brother that at one point said, I'm going to be an engineer. And what did I say? Me too. And that would have been fine. But I've always been pretty good in science and math. And I encountered a teacher in 8th grade. And he was fundamental to my decision because he didn't look at me and say, why do you want to be an engineer? He looked at me and said, why not be an engineer? And I took his direction and encouragement to heart. I'm guessing most of us in this room have somebody that made that difference, that got us thinking that STEM was the right way to go. Now I'll go back to DoD because we have a unique role to play in supporting STEM. The Department of Defense has 63 laboratories throughout the United States where we do cutting-edge research and development every day in support of our nation's warfighters. We employ nearly half, about 46% of all scientists and engineers within the federal government, over 106,000 as of December 2015. But DoD has a growing need for an increasing number of scientists and engineers in their workforce. As I said earlier, technology is global and accelerating at a rapid pace. New technical competence and expertise is required. It's incumbent upon us to help develop and maintain a STEM pipeline. The department recognizes that we need more than just the best technology out there. We need the best people too. That's both a challenge and an opportunity for us. A challenge because we require a STEM workforce that's predominantly made up of US citizenry. An opportunity because we have very tough problems and we're looking for new approaches to solve them. So it gives you the ability to be inventive. And because we offer unique experiences like apprentice and internships that allow high school and college students and postdocs to directly apply what they're learning to some of these really tough challenges and get a firsthand view of what it means to be a laboratory scientist or engineer. An example of one of these opportunities is our Science, Mathematics, and Research for Transformation Scholarship for Service program. The SMART program allows the Department of Defense to help finance higher education for a small payback of time in working for the department. Overall, we strive to provide the best STEM opportunities and education programs to help train, maintain, and retain the best STEM workforce available for the Department of Defense, for the Defense Industrial Base, and for the nation as a whole. That is why STEM education matters. Given the time we have on this panel, we'll have an opportunity to touch on just a small snapshot of key issues related to STEM. The panel will have a chance to share their perspectives and discuss their roles in STEM education, and you will have a chance to ask the panel questions. So I look forward to this dialogue. And now I'm going to start it with some of the lead-in to the questions to our panel members. Increasing academic achievement for all students with an emphasis on improving the performance of students traditionally underrepresented in STEM is a critical goal of education reform in the United States. Many educators and policymakers focus on improving student learning in STEM subjects because workers' proficiency in STEM fields is considered vital to the health of the economy. The National Science Board in 2015 reported that student scores on mathematics assessments showed some small improvements, continuing a pattern of small but consistent increases over time. Expertise has also improved, but remains lower than necessary in STEM areas for all age groups. Data for the nation's elementary and high school students reveal that achievement gaps in mathematics continue to persist for students from disadvantaged backgrounds, and international assessments reveal that the United States lags behind other developed countries in average mathematics and science literacy scores. So here is the question. While the U.S. has implemented programs in STEM targeted at education at various levels, K through 12, collegiate, postdoc. Many studies report the needed expertise is lower than necessary for all age groups in STEM areas. How can we, as stewards of education, ensure that our students are encouraged to excel and are given adequate opportunities to do so at the right ages? So, Cecelia?
Yeah, let me go ahead and start that. So again, I'm with Texas Instruments, and I've already had a couple of conversations in the hallways about the calculators that y'all grew up with. So yes, that is probably one of our biggest brands and what we're known for. But Texas Instruments is a global semiconductor company. We manufacture, we sell, we design semiconductor chips and a lot of the products that were spoken of earlier already. And so we need the best, the brightest minds working on the toughest challenges, technology challenges that we have in front of us to solve some of these. So what do? We're investing in the talent pipeline with, by way of investments, by way of channeling opportunities, as well as personal engagement. We are helping students build a strong foundation for an understanding of math, science, and engineering. And so how are we doing this? We basically are trying to create moments in which students of all backgrounds, of all ages, find that moment when they fall in love with science and math. That happened to me when I was in the 3rd grade. I fell in love with science and just absolutely tried to figure out what was I going to do with myself from that spark that was lit back then. So we also use ourselves as role models. We deploy lots of volunteers that go into schools, directly into schools. We invest our time, we invest our money, and we equip the K through 12 programs, students and teachers, educators, so that they can excel in the STEM disciplines. We also invest in partnering with and associating with, helping the diversity programs, engineering programs that have STEM efforts so that they can succeed in their STEM programs as well. And the last place in which we put our time and effort is in engineering contest, robotics contest. And these robotics contests, again, are where we have TI people going out, spending their time, effort, and money as well in 6th grade up through high school programs, working with them, showing them what fun they can have in this area. From a university standpoint, we continue to invest in university research. We also work very closely, and I personally also work very closely with universities in their innovation centers and their education programs so that they can also grow stronger and develop their STEM programs as well. So in each one of these areas, what we're looking to do is really to spark and to ignite that idea of what else is there for me in STEM, and to be able to generate that next generation of innovation.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me here. It's a great question. It's such an illustrious group. I'm really honored, so thanks. I would argue that our challenges to improve STEM education are really ones of scale and of execution. And I've seen in my work both in Chicago and here in Washington, lots of barriers getting in the way of executing programs over time and bringing these sorts of things to scale. There's plenty of great schools that are doing a great job turning out kids who know the subjects well and can think deeply and critically, but there's a lot who aren't. We have to figure out how to drive those things to scale. And as Gregg, I'm sure, will tell you soon, he's a master at taking programs and bringing them to scale. It's really, really difficult work. You can't just sort of come up with one idea and assume it's going to work in every school, because schools are complicated organizations with traditions and personalities and cultures and contexts that are really, really different. And we've got an education system that's very much driven by quick wins, with superintendents having 2 or 3 year contracts, school board members being elected for 2 to 4 years. There's a real pressure on to do things quickly instead of putting the long-term investments in people, in tools, in supports, so that over time we can really generate the capacity to do this. So I like to think of the STEM education challenge as really one of figuring out how to implement and execute strategies that have worked in hothouses and figure out how to bring those to scale.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, my thought, if we're going to solve this as a country, there are so many groups, so many communities, so many businesses who are taking on this problem. And to me, the most vital way we can solve this is to really emphasize programs that actually work and produce meaningful data. Because there are so many wonderful feel-good STEM programs out there, but are they producing the data that we need to solve this massive problem? I suspect that if we actually just focus on the programs that are producing the results that we need for all students at all grade levels, if everyone collectively rallied around those programs, I think that the problem that we have in the country being ranked so low in math and science would be greatly mitigated. And so that is my plea, is that for everyone who invests in STEM education, to focus on programs that produce meaningful student outcome results.
I couldn't agree with that more, and I'd just like to add just a couple of thoughts from a business perspective. We as an organization stepped back and looked at how important STEM was to us and what we saw going on in the environment. And the analogy that I like to use is we saw a school of fish, a school of very well-meaning fish, but a school of fish. Everybody has this issue effectively surrounded and is doing great things, but nobody is organizing the school to swim in the same direction towards solutions that make sense. Which really got us fired up, because we thought, just as my colleague from Texas Instruments thought, that this was something that business could do. And then I started to look at what we were doing inside our firm, and it looked pretty much like a school of fish. We were doing exactly the same stuff. The notion, though, that's important from a business perspective, I think, is to intervene where we can have the most impact. And that tends to be where we are losing the most STEM talent in the educational cycle. For us, it's a workforce cycle, because when you get to the end of it, hopefully we can compete for you and you can come work for us and have a great career. So we just think about K-12, preschool, and post-grad as the cycle of development for people who are eventually going to work for us. And I think most businesses think about it the same way. We are losing STEM talent at every stage of the educational discussion, and therefore there need to be meaningful interventions at every stage of that discussion. And what I encourage my business colleagues to do, as my colleague from Texas Instruments just said, is to stop focusing at the end of the pipeline, which is where we typically, with our relatively short-term view of the world, look. Somebody's in college, we're looking for STEM talent or people with STEM skills to work for us. We don't find enough of them on campus. We get upset, we complain, we kvetch, we do all of those things, as opposed to, let's sort of move down the scale a little bit and say, well, how come we lost a bunch of girls as early as the 6th grade in the STEM pipeline? How come 80% of high school students indicate that they are absolutely positively uninterested in working in a STEM profession going forward? Those are opportunities foregone for us. So my admonition to everybody is to dive in early and to dive in where you can have the most impact with programs that work.
Thank you. So you heard that a lot of us believe that there is a shortage of STEM educated workforce, what we need in our pipeline growing up and what we have available to us now. However, there is a trend that out there and studies that say that perhaps there is an exaggeration for the demand of STEM for educated personnel. And in fact, in 2013, there was an article written by Hal Salzman where he noted that Steve Jobs of Apple had told the President of the United States that Apple would have located 700,000 manufacturing jobs in the U.S. here instead of China if only they'd been able to find enough U.S. engineers to support their operations. And in fact, there's no indication that Apple ever attempted to search for the aforementioned engineers. And if Apple had located its operations here in the U.S., it would have cost them about $42,000 per worker instead of the $4,800 that they paid for those workers in China. In contrast to these reports about the future STEM workforce, we have noted in the President's Council on Advisor of Science and Technology that we graduated about 25,000 more engineers just a few years ago than we had jobs available to fill. They could not find work in their disciplines. It's been reported that 74% of graduates with STEM bachelor's degrees are not employed in STEM jobs. Can you discuss industry's need for an educated STEM workforce from your perspective? So I'll start with you, Cecelia. How do you feel Texas Instruments is implementing strategic recruiting to attract top talent to STEM careers in the U.S.? And what is the importance from your perspective?
So, as I outlined, I'm really excited about the work that Texas Instruments has been able to do and has been investing in several years. Actually, several of the team members and panelists up here have been part of what Texas Instruments' focus areas have been. And so we are very results-oriented, results-driven, as well as looking to make sure that we do get return from the investments that we are making. One of the things that I also wanted to share with you is that in many of the programs that I had mentioned earlier, I personally volunteer and give my time and am present and visible in these K through 12 programs as well as the college programs. And what I find myself is that I then become a role model in those moments and in that instant to girls, to women, and also to members of minority groups, as I am a Hispanic woman, and that is something that is not found too often in the engineering field. And so why I share that is because this is what also happened to me when I was in college. I knew, like I told you, since third grade, I wanted to be a science. I knew I wanted to be a scientist. That's all I knew, and that's all I had read about. I did not know what an engineer was or what that looked like, sounded like, meant. So I'm in college, and I had an industry professional, actually he was on campus, tapped me on the shoulder, had been working with me on some subject matter, and asked what I was majoring in. And I said, I'm undeclared. And he said, well, given everything that I've seen you do and what you've been able to accomplish, you should consider engineering, electrical engineering. And so next time I saw him, he had brought back some pamphlets, and I did my own homework and understanding what it was, and here I am. I graduated as electrical engineer. And so I firmly believe that we as industry professionals absolutely have to engage with all the groups of students from the young up into the university level on a regular basis to be that role model for them. And at Texas Instruments, one thing that we're making sure we tap into is the underpenetrated women and minority group that we see as a great pool of talent to grow the engineering field. And so something you may have heard of and seen from Texas Instruments, we absolutely value and believe in diversity. We believe it fuels our innovation. And we need STEM-capable talent. And so because of this, we are going to continue to be focused with our investments. We're going to continue to create those opportunities and also expect the personal engagement from industry to be able to continue to spark and drive the opportunities for STEM and growing that in the field.
Thank you. David, you also represent industry. Can you discuss your need for an educated STEM workforce from your perspective?
Sure, would be happy to. But first, I want to address your intro and the varying proof points we see about whether there is a shortage of STEM versus whether there's a surplus of STEM. And I'll answer this from the perspective of an economist who for years and years and years has worked in accounting firms. And the answer is yes. There is both a shortage as well as a surplus. And the basic notion that I think everybody should get with regard to the statistics is that it really varies depending on how you define the term STEM, which is both clear because it's an acronym, but hugely ambiguous. Because what does science in the context of STEM mean? What does technology in the context of STEM mean? Are we talking about somebody's educational background, or are we talking about the job that they do? And business tends to look at those two on a matrix. We certainly do hire people who have the educational background, but we also hire people for roles that are, in our view, STEM related. And it's quite possible that we have a lot of people, and likely in our firm, quite frankly, that we have a lot of people who are working in STEM roles who are not STEM educated people. So it is, not surprising that in one hand we can have a bunch of well-trained engineers unable to find jobs in the STEM profession. Yet we have Steve Jobs arguing that he can't find engineers. Yet we have something like 11.4, maybe 12 million people who have STEM-related education who aren't working in STEM. All that is perfectly possible in the context of this debate. And it takes us back to, I think, the way business needs to approach this, at least in my mind. I hearken back, I have a story very much like Cecilia's, except it's completely in reverse. When I got to college, I absolutely positively was told by my mother, by my counselor, by a bunch of other people, you are absolutely going to major in engineering, and you are absolutely going to be an engineer when you finish school. That lasted for 2 semesters until my first thermodynamics course, Cecelia. At which point I promptly moved to something that was a bit less formal, a bit more simple, at least in my mind, because there was no rhyme, reason, or rules to it. Economics by background. So the notion of what you say and a mentor guiding you, I think, is extremely important. What I would say from a business perspective, in addition to my earlier comments, is twofold. First, as an organization, you have to work to your working definition of what STEM is in your organization. Is it the role? Is it the educational background? Or is it some combination? In Deloitte, we define it with both, and what we would say is the vast majority of people in our firm will either be working in a STEM-related activity or have a STEM-related background going forward, which is why the investment in STEM for us is so important. Once we get there, we then work very hard to figure out what's the right intervention point for us in the STEM marketplace. I'll say it as nicely as I possibly can. What one of my heroes, Steve Jobs, said about not finding enough engineers to locate in the United States was probably true. But what he left out was at the wage he wanted to pay them, which is a key part of the STEM conversation. This is really a labor economics discussion at the end of the day for the population of people who are out there who have the background. So again, business is about what we're going to pay people and defining what we really need in terms of STEM backgrounds, and whether it's the educational background or the skill set.
Thank you. I often use the term a STEM literate workforce. They might not all be engineers or mathematicians or scientists, but pretty much we have a workforce that needs to understand technology. We have a nation that needs to understand technology. Cecelia had mentioned her outreach specifically in the area of women and minority groups and the underrepresented STEM workforce. A 2016 New York University Early Childhood Longitudinal Study reported out on a group of kindergartners in 1998, starting in 1998, and their progression through the education system. At that time, back in 98 and 99, when these kids were in kindergarten, U.S. boys and girls began with a similar math proficiency, but disparities, as we've heard before, started to show up by grade 3, with the girls falling behind, except for people like Cecelia, who decided that was her interest area. The gap was particularly large among the highest math achievers. The National Science Board in 2015 notes that women represented only 28% of the individuals with college degrees working in science and engineering occupations. And while Asians are overrepresented in the STEM workforce, Hispanics and Blacks are underrepresented. Hispanics with 14% of the population, but only 7% of the S&E highest degree holders, and 5% in the S&E occupations, and Blacks, who are 11.5% of the population, only holding about 6% of the S&E highest degree holders and 4.6% of the S&E occupations. So this is a question for Gregg. What role does NIMSI play in advancing STEM education? And are there any specific programs to prioritize an increase in women and minorities in this field?
Thanks, Mary. So our mission is to dramatically increase student opportunities and achievements for all students, representing the diversity that the country represents by advancing STEM teaching and learning. And what makes us unique is really the meaningful student outcomes that we achieve. We, through our metric, through our college readiness program that greatly increases the number of students matriculating into STEM majors and graduating with STEM careers, we use advanced placement exams, and we dramatically increase the number of students succeeding in advanced placement exams, and especially for minorities and women in math and science. It's much as 10 times the national average. And we do that in a relatively short period of time. But Mary, you and I were talking a little bit earlier that we just can't start doing this in high school, and that our programs go all the way down, actually starting in 3rd grade. And there's discussion, internally of should we even start even sooner. That what we want to do is we train teachers of vertically aligned to really infuse the appropriate rigor so that students can be successful in college and in career. And what is important to us, what makes us really unique, are these really dramatic increases in number of students doing well in being prepared for college, as measured by increasing the number of students succeeding on advanced placement exams. And we have, because of our results, we have wonderful partners. We have the Department of Defense, the TI, many other public, private, and philanthropic organizations. And the reasons why we have the support is because a STEM literate and STEM proficient workforce is vital to all the businesses up here and also out here. You absolutely, as Mary said, it's not just graduating with a STEM major. And as David said, we need a STEM literate society to be successful in all of the businesses, for all the population that's going into the workforce. And it's critical. It's a national security issue in order to really be able to achieve this for all students. And so what our programs do, while we don't specifically target minorities and women, we have fantastic results among minorities and women, because what we do is we target the entire population. And by doing that, we get great achievement through all students. And what's really important to the businesses and supporters that we have are the return on investments that they have with us. Texas Instruments has been with us for 16 years, because not only are we producing their future workforce in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, but we also, as a member of the community, they're doing something with us meaningful with the districts that are producing student achievement. So what we do at the National Math and Science Initiative, we address the problem head-on by improving performance among all students and using meaningful metrics that make sure that students matriculate into STEM majors and graduate from them.
Thank you very much. And Mike, you get the last question before we kick it out to the audience. And that may be a challenging question. Do you believe with the emergence of STEM-heavy curriculums that we are crowding out the humanities to a detrimental extent?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I've been a STEM guy all my life, but I think literature is important, and art and economics and philosophy and recess and soft skills. Like, kids need all that sort of stuff. The world is complicated. They need to learn that, and probably we're not doing enough to help kids learn all those sorts of things. The pressures on our schools are really great, and it's hard work. And I think that's a tension that we'll always have to tackle with, probably mostly at the local level, but it's something we'll have to tackle with. When I was leading curriculum at the Chicago Public Schools, once a week somebody would come to me and say, Mike, you need to add this to your curriculum, you need to teach this. And whether it was some new topic in history or some environmental thing or some whatever, nobody ever offered to take something away. And that's not tenable. You see it right now with the computer science push. I'm a big supporter of it, but this sort of thinking that, we need to redo everything and just do computer science everywhere in schools will somehow integrate it in or fit it in is just feel-good talk. It doesn't work practically, and the discussion isn't being reasonable. That said, STEM is different in some ways that are really important. Our country, our society, doesn't really understand science and its practice and math as its practice. And that means when we let local schools and local classrooms sort of decide what to do, which I am a big proponent of, we have to do so realizing that there's often not a lot of capacity for science and mathematics in those schools, and we may not really want them making all those decisions. They're going to need help. And just like I think there's a pretty well-established push for federal investments in basic R&D and that kind of scientific endeavor. I think without having a pretty strong push from people like you that says science matters, STEM matters, math matters, so that when people at the local level make those decisions, they have the tools and the capacity and the messaging to say, hey, this does matter. Even though we may not understand it or know how to do it, we know it's important and we know how to get help and call people like Gregg to help make your programs really work.
Thank you. So now I'll open it to questions in the audience. Sir?
I'm Nathan Rosenberg, a member of CED. Actually going to be a hog and ask two questions. In my spare time, I'm the Vice President of Operations for the Boy Scouts of America, and in the last 5 years we started a pilot program called STEM Scouts. So instead of wearing knee socks and going out and cooking in the wild, kids go in laboratories and do fun things, and the programs was started by two PhDs from Oak Ridge, and they've done an amazing job, and I'm pretty sure the program will go nationally. Early on, we talked about scale. Any advice on how to scale that program up? Hundreds of thousands of boys participate in scouting. STEM Scouts is going to be co-ed, so we're going to have issues of scale, number one. Then number two is, I'd just like to follow up on the curriculum question. I'm a graduate of the Air Force Academy. I was forced to take engineering and science and math classes that I never got anything other than C's in, and I thank God for that education. I thank America for that education, because now I can talk to scientists, I can talk to engineers, and have at least follow the conversation, if not contribute to it. So as I watch my grandkids, it seems to me they don't have to take math classes. They can graduate from high school without taking a series of math courses. They can graduate from high school without taking physics or chemistry to any real degree. How do you make sure that kids are, at least, whether they're going to be scientists or mathematicians or technologists or engineers or not, how can you make sure that the curriculum's appropriate to both those who aspire to that, but those who just need the background?
Greg, would you talk on scale, and then Mike, maybe you on the curriculum?
Sounds great. So with the scale, my first thought is that it sounds like a absolutely wonderful program. I assume that in order to scale, you are going to need funding to be able to do that. So my suggestion, or at least what's worked for us, is to be able to show funders, show supporters, show the community what meaningful outcomes are being derived from that program. Once again, how can you measure it? How can you measure it to show everyone that it's successful? And that, if you are able to do that, I think that there could generate a lot of interest in having folks wanting to support it.
In the face of a national statistic that says kids at that age are dropping out or losing interest dramatically in STEM, if you had some sort of survey tool that would suggest that the kids you're touching maintain an interest in STEM going forward, that might be of real interest to funders, no matter what background they come from.
David, as in measuring that they're taking classes later on without long-term study?
That they're taking classes, or that the interest in the topic continues as opposed to falling off.
Yeah, ideally, right, it'd be able to track some students over time, either through survey and through actual courses, to show that what your intervention is making a difference.
Thank you. Very valuable.
And sort of on the curriculum piece, it doesn't really work to mandate or require quality. Like, that doesn't really happen. Like, we can require the floor, but you can't really require the ceiling. There are some places where we should require the floor, but I think in this case, probably what needs to happen is a lot of what Greg was talking about around implementation and execution. Like, we need to set the expectations, make sure that schools, districts, states have the tools to get there, and that means good teachers. I don't think finding great teachers is wonderful, but teaching is a profession of the masses, and we need to help figure out how to make ordinary people do extraordinary things. We have underinvested in curriculum materials and tools for teachers. There's a recent study that Rand did that said most teachers are finding their lesson plans from Google or from Pinterest, which doesn't really give you sort of whole units that tell stories and build ideas over time, and it makes doing training and support for teachers really tough when everybody's on a different Google page finding whatever their lesson is. So I think investing in tools and mechanisms for teachers to practice their craft and get better at it is something that, quite frankly, we've been missing. And then it's making sure that we have leaders in those schools who understand science and math and their practice, and who have the resources but also the time to set these sorts of programs up. Expecting brand new courses to be turning wonderfully prepared kids in a year or two isn't practical in most places. You need 3, 4, 5 years to make these things work, and that we're pretty impatient people. So if we can figure out how to make that stick, we'll do better.
Ma'am?
Thank you. Speaking of impatient people, excuse me for putting my hand up. I thought you were finished. My name is Paula Stern. I've been with CED for a long time, and have been working since the National Science Foundation set up the National Center for Women and Information Technology, NCWIT, which deals with one aspect of what is a national challenge. This panel, however, is only dealing with education, but it's dealing with STEM, and we're having a problem talking about how do we resolve the serious situation that you described in your opening comment. STEM is like 62 different categories. And I would urge that we focus our very limited resources on dealing with the greatest problem with regard to participation of all, both women and minorities, as well as boys, on computer science and computing and information technology, because that is where the numbers are horrible when it comes to inclusiveness, and that is where the problem, according to the National Science Foundation and all the other studies, show is the most severe. So I would ask this panel to comment on the degree to which you are focusing your energy, and I would specifically ask Professor Lach and Mr. Fleisher about Computer Science for All initiative. We are at the beginning of a new administration. The president, who has been the computer president, has a Computer Science for All initiative, which addresses just a few of the points that I just made here, and it is not guaranteed that President Trump will care a bit as much as President Obama has. What are you doing to make sure that the initiatives to get into the school systems, K-12, both formal and informal, will be privatized or state-run or federally run, knowing that President Trump may not be as committed to computer science for all?
So I'll just say we have about a minute left.
I'll go quick and sort of tackle this because I've done a bit of work here. As I said, I'm a computer science fan, and I've done some NSF research and work on K-12 computer science. I've talked with a lot of urban school districts about this issue, and my response is basically meh. I think it's pretty problematic in a lot of ways. When I look at the politics and the policies, I see tech firms paying governors and representatives to do, for their campaigns, and in return they sort of say, well, I'm going to promote computer science because you're a Silicon Valley firm and that's the sort of stuff that you like, and then sort of passing that on to the State Department or the school district employees who are like, great, we don't have any idea what to do, and like there's no curriculum and there's no tests and there's no PD, and there's just a bunch of tech bros running around trying to get us to do this stuff that we don't really understand. And oh, by the way, our kids are still behind in math and they're behind in reading, and nobody really wants to focus on that. We love our iPhones and we love Steve Jobs, but that's not quite what it all is about. And I think we've got a real challenge here to sort of integrate this real important push for computational thinking and instructional technology into this broader sense of the kind of kids we want our schools to produce and how we're going to do that. And for that, I think it means focusing on quality, not quantity. The history of education is filled with attempts to get women and poor and minority kids, giving them really crappy solutions because they were cheap and saying it was going to be good. Look at there's a lot of history of the online education that's been doing that. And I think that's the wrong approach here. I would say let's make it really good, and let's go slow and focus on quality computer science education in the K-12 space, and get it right and build on that and show some momentum there and let it build in that way.
So Gregg's going to have the last very short word.
Yeah, very short. So I just want to alleviate your fears. The train's pretty much left the station with computer science. NCWIT's a great organization, but because of folks like Code.org and the College Board, both of organizations which we help get started as far as, the new AP Computer Science Principles course. It's going to be just a massive, in a year or so, a massive amount of students being able to take that. Or other organizations like NCWIT, Code.org, and so many others, computer science, whether or not the Trump administration funds the initiative, it's still a lot more prominent than it has been in the past.
I concur with that. Thank you to the panel for being here to engage in these questions. Thank you for the audience. I'm sorry we cut you short on Q&A. Hopefully you can catch us in the hallway. Thanks.